I was grabbing my purse to go to the notary's office with my daughter-in-law. She said it was to update my papers. Then my lawyer texted me, "Call me now. Don't go to that meeting." What he showed me about her plan changed everything. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. I was standing in front of my bedroom mirror, smoothing down my best blue blouse when the text came through. The sound of my phone buzzing against the nightstand made me pause, lipstick halfway to my mouth. At 67, I wasn't used to urgent messages, especially not on a Tuesday morning when I was getting ready for what should have been a routine trip to the notary's office. "Ready, Marcy?" Kinsley's voice drifted up from downstairs, that artificially sweet tone she'd been using with me for the past 3 weeks. My daughter-in-law had been unusually attentive lately, offering to help with errands, bringing me groceries I didn't ask for, and insisting we update my important papers together. I picked up my phone, expecting maybe a reminder from my doctor's office or one of those spam messages about my car warranty. Instead, I saw Trevor's name on the screen. My lawyer never texted me. In the 15 years he'd been handling my affairs, every communication had been through phone calls or formal letters. The message was short, but made my blood run cold. "Call me now. Don't go to that meeting." My hand started trembling as I read it again. The exclamation points weren't like Trevor at all. He was methodical, careful with his words. Something was very wrong. "Marcy? We really should leave soon if we want to make our 11 o'clock appointment," Kinsley called again, her voice carrying that edge of impatience she tried so hard to hide around Dominic. I sat down heavily on my bed, clutching the phone. The past few weeks replayed in my mind like a movie I'd seen but hadn't really paid attention to. Kinsley suggesting I consolidate my accounts, her offering to help organize my filing cabinet, the way she'd redirect conversations whenever I asked specific questions about these updates we were supposedly making. My son Dominic had been distant lately too, avoiding eye contact during our weekly dinners. When I'd ask about work or their plans for the holidays, he'd give me short answers and change the subject. I'd chalked it up to stress from his job at the construction company, but now I wondered if there was more to it. I dialed Trevor's number with shaking fingers. "Marcy, thank God," he answered on the first ring. "Where are you right now?" "At home, getting ready to leave for the notary." "Trevor, what's going on? You're scaring me." There was a pause, and I could hear papers rustling in the background. "I need you to stay exactly where you are. Don't sign anything. Don't go anywhere with Kinsley. Can you get her to leave?" My heart was pounding now. "I don't understand. She said we were just updating some routine paperwork, making sure my will and power of attorney were current." "Marcy, listen to me very carefully. The documents she's planning to have you sign today would give her complete control over your house, your bank accounts, everything. She's been planning this for months." The room felt like it was spinning. I gripped the edge of my mattress, trying to steady myself. That can't be right. She's my daughter-in-law. We may not always see eye to eye, but she wouldn't. "I have copies of the documents, Marcy. She had them drawn up by a different lawyer 3 weeks ago. I only found out because the notary called me when he saw my name listed as your current attorney. He wanted to confirm the changes." Downstairs, I heard Kinsley's heels clicking impatiently across the hardwood floor. "Marcy? Is everything okay up there?" I covered the phone's mouthpiece. "Just a minute, dear. I'm looking for my reading glasses." Trevor's voice came through urgently when I put the phone back to my ear. "You need to get her out of there so we can talk properly. Tell her you're not feeling well, anything, but don't let on that you know what she's planning." My mind was reeling. 3 months ago, Kinsley had been distant and cold, barely speaking to me except when absolutely necessary. Then suddenly, she'd become helpful, concerned about my future security, and making sure everything was in order. I'd been so grateful for what seemed like an improvement in our relationship that I hadn't questioned her motives. "What about Dominic?" I whispered into the phone. "Does he know?" The silence that followed was answer enough. "Marcy, I'm coming over. Can you stall for about 20 minutes? I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. "Yes, I think so." And Marcy? Don't trust anyone right now. Not until we figure out exactly how deep this goes. I hung up and sat in the silence of my bedroom, looking around at the space I'd shared with my late husband Robert for 38 years. The framed photos of our wedding, of Dominic's graduation, of family holidays that seemed so much simpler in hindsight. Had I been naive to think that family meant something? That the people closest to you would protect you, not prey on you? Kinsley's voice came again, sharper now. Marcy, we're going to be late. I forced myself to stand up and walk to the top of the stairs. She was standing in the foyer, car keys in one hand, her purse slung over her shoulder. She looked perfect as always, her blonde hair styled in that expensive cut, wearing the designer dress I'd helped pay for when Dominic's hours got cut last winter. I'm sorry, Kinsley, but I'm not feeling very well. Could we possibly reschedule for later this week? Her expression flickered for just a moment, and I caught something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Calculation. Cold calculation. Oh, that's unfortunate, she said, but her voice lacked any real concern. It's just that I had to move several things around to make time for this appointment today. Are you sure it's not just nerves? These kinds of legal matters can feel overwhelming. The way she said overwhelming made my skin crawl, as if I were some confused old woman who needed to be managed. I'm quite sure, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Perhaps we could meet Thursday instead? She stood there for a long moment, and I could practically see her mind working, calculating her next move. Finally, she forced a smile. Of course. I'll call and reschedule. You rest up, and I'll check on you later. After she left, I double-locked the front door and went to the kitchen to make tea with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Through the window, I watched her car disappear down the street, and for the first time in months, I felt afraid in my own home. 20 minutes later, Trevor's familiar gray sedan pulled into my driveway, and I had never been so relieved to see anyone in my life. Trevor sat across from me at my kitchen table, a manila folder spread open between us. His usually neat gray hair looked disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it. In all the years I'd known him, I'd never seen him look this shaken. I'm going to show you something, Marcy, and I need you to prepare yourself. What Kinsley was planning to have you sign today. He pulled out a stack of papers. These aren't routine updates. This is a complete transfer of ownership of your house to her name. My teacup rattled against the saucer as I set it down. That's impossible. Why would I sign my house over to her? According to these documents, you're doing it because you're no longer mentally competent to manage your own affairs. He pointed to a section highlighted in yellow. She's claiming you've been showing signs of dementia and that she needs to protect your assets. The words hit me like a physical blow. Dementia? That's ridiculous. I'm as sharp as I've ever been. I know that, Marcy. But look at this. He showed me another document. She has 3 witnesses lined up to testify to your supposed mental decline. Neighbors who would swear they've noticed you being confused, forgetful. I scanned the names, recognizing Mrs. Patterson from next door and Tom Bradley from down the street. People I'd considered friends, people I'd brought casseroles to when they were sick, who I'd helped when they needed someone to watch their pets. They agreed to lie about me? Trevor's expression was grim. For $500 each according to the payment receipts I found. My hands were shaking again. I clasped them together in my lap, trying to process what I was hearing. But even if she got the house, surely there are legal protections. I mean, where would I live? The look Trevor gave me made my stomach drop. He pulled out another set of papers. Sunset Manor Assisted Living. She's already put down a deposit and filled out the admission paperwork. You were supposed to be moved there by the end of the month. I felt the color drain from my face. Sunset Manor. I'd visited a friend there once, and the smell of disinfectant and despair had haunted me for weeks. Rows of elderly people parked in wheelchairs along sterile hallways, staring at television screens that no one was really watching. She can't just put me somewhere against my will. She can if she has legal guardianship, which is exactly what these documents would have given her. Trevor leaned forward, his voice gentle but urgent. Marcy, once you signed these papers, you would have had almost no legal rights. She could have made every decision about your life, your money, your medical care. I stood up abruptly, needing to move, to pace, to do something with the energy coursing through me. And Dominic? What does my son have to say about all this? Trevor was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his words were careful, measured. Dominic's signature is on several of these documents as a witness. The kitchen tilted around me. I gripped the back of my chair to keep from falling. He knows? It appears so, yes. My legs gave out and I sank back into my chair. My son, my only child, the little boy I'd rocked to sleep every night, who I'd sat with through countless fevers and scraped knees, who I'd worked double shifts to put through college. He knew they were planning to steal my home and lock me away. There's more, Marcy. Trevor's voice seemed to come from very far away. The house isn't the only thing. She also has papers drawn up to access your savings account, your retirement fund, even Robert's life insurance money that you've been keeping for emergencies. How much are we talking about? Approximately $850,000. The number hung in the air between us like a death sentence, not because it was so large, but because it represented my entire life's work. Robert's years as a machinist, my decades as a school secretary, every sacrifice we'd made to build something to leave behind for our son. She knew exactly what I have, I whispered, down to the penny. Which means she's been planning this for a long time. These kinds of documents don't get drawn up overnight. I thought about all the times Kinsley had offered to help me with my bills, insisting I was working too hard to manage everything myself. The way she'd volunteered to take me to the bank when I needed to make withdrawals. How she'd suggested I keep all my important papers in one place for convenience. She's been studying me, I said, the realization making me feel sick. Learning my routines, my finances, my weaknesses. Trevor nodded grimly. The notary told me she came in 2 weeks ago to review the documents, making sure everything was in order. She was very specific about the timing. What do you mean? She wanted to make sure the house transfer went through before Christmas. According to the real estate agent she contacted, she was hoping to have it on the market by January. My heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. She was going to sell my home? The house Robert and I bought when Dominic was 3? Where we raised him? Where we celebrated every holiday? I'm sorry, Marcy. But yes, that appears to be the plan. I sat in stunned silence, looking around the kitchen where I'd made thousands of meals, where Robert and I had our morning coffee every day for 38 years, where Dominic had done his homework at this very table. The thought of strangers walking through these rooms, deciding whether our life together was worth buying, made me feel physically ill. What happens now? I finally managed to ask. Now we make sure she can't do this to you or anyone else. Trevor began gathering the papers. I've already contacted the police about the fraud, but we need to be smart about this. If she realizes we know what she's planning, she might try something else. Like what? I don't know, and I don't want to find out. He closed the folder and looked at me seriously. Marcy, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Have you felt pressured to sign anything else recently? Have there been any other unusual requests or suggestions about your finances or your health? I thought back over the past few weeks. She's been very interested in my prescription medications lately, asking about my blood pressure pills, whether I ever feel dizzy or confused. Last week, she suggested I should see a doctor about my memory, said she'd noticed I was repeating stories. Trevor's jaw tightened. What did you tell her? That I felt fine, that everyone repeats stories sometimes. But she kept pushing, saying she was concerned about me living alone, that maybe I should consider having someone check on me more regularly. Has she been in your house when you weren't here? The question sent a chill down my spine. She has a key. I gave it to her and Dominic for emergencies years ago. Trevor made a note on his legal pad. We need to change your locks immediately. And Marcy, I want you to be very careful about what you eat or drink when they're around. If she's been planning this for months, there's no telling what else she might be capable of. The implication of his words hit me like a truck. You think she would try to drug me? I think she's already demonstrated that she's willing to commit fraud, bribery, and conspiracy to get what she wants. I don't want to take any chances with your safety. As Trevor left, Promising to return the next morning with a locksmith and a plan, I found myself alone in the house that had been my sanctuary for so many years. But now every creak of the floorboards, every shadow in the corners, felt threatening. The people I'd trusted most in the world had been planning to destroy my life, and I had been completely blind to it. I walked through each room, seeing it now through Kinsley's eyes, not as a home filled with memories, but as an asset to be liquidated. I wondered how long they'd been discussing my future behind my back, planning my imprisonment while smiling to my face. But as I stood in my bedroom, looking at the photo of Robert on my nightstand, I felt something else begin to stir alongside the fear and betrayal. Anger. Deep, burning anger that they thought they could do this to me. That they believed I was weak enough, foolish enough to be their victim. They had made a serious mistake in underestimating me. The locksmith left at 9 a.m, and I was testing my new keys when Trevor returned with a box of files that made my stomach clench just looking at it. He set it down on my dining room table with the weight of someone carrying evidence of a crime, which I was beginning to realize was exactly what it was. "I spent all night going through everything," he said, looking like he hadn't slept. "Marcy, what I'm about to tell you is going to be difficult to hear, but you need to know the full scope of what they were planning." I poured him coffee with hands that had stopped shaking but felt cold despite the warm October morning. "Show me everything." He opened the first folder and spread out a timeline he'd created. "This goes back 18 months, to right after Robert's funeral. 3 weeks after he died, Kinsley started making inquiries about your financial situation." "Inquiries with whom?" "Your bank, for starters. She called claiming to be concerned about your ability to manage your accounts alone. She also contacted your insurance company asking about the details of Robert's life insurance payout." I stared at the dates on his timeline. 18 months ago, when I was still raw with grief, barely able to get through each day without falling apart. I remember her being helpful then. She offered to drive me to appointments, help with paperwork. She was gathering information. Trevor pointed to another entry. 2 months after that, she started researching assisted living facilities. Not just Sunset Manor, but 6 different places. She toured them, collected brochures, asked about costs and admission procedures. The betrayal cut deeper than I'd thought possible. While I was mourning my husband of 42 years, she was already planning to warehouse me somewhere out of the way. "There's more." He opened another folder. "Last spring, she began documenting what she claimed were incidents of your mental decline. She kept a journal." He handed me a photocopied notebook page in Kinsley's neat handwriting. The entries made my blood boil. March 15th. Marcy repeated the same story about her garden 3 times during lunch, clearly losing short-term memory. April 2nd. Found her confused about which day of the week it was. She was watering plants on a Thursday when she usually does it on Sunday. April 20th. She couldn't remember where she put her car keys and accused me of moving them. Increasing paranoia, typical of early dementia. I looked up at Trevor, fury building in my chest. These are lies. Complete fabrications. I know. But they're convincing lies. She documented dozens of these supposed incidents, building a case that you were becoming incompetent. And Dominic believed this? Trevor's expression grew even more grim. That's where it gets complicated. He pulled out another set of documents. Your son signed an affidavit stating that he'd witnessed your mental decline and supported the decision to place you in supervised care. The paper felt like it was burning my fingers. There was Dominic's signature, bold and familiar, on a legal document that declared me mentally unfit. My own son, swearing under oath that his mother had lost her mind. When did he sign this? 6 weeks ago. 6 weeks. I set the paper down carefully, afraid I might tear it in half. We had dinner together 4 weeks ago. He sat right here in this kitchen and asked me how I was feeling. I told him I was doing well, staying active. He hugged me goodbye and said he was proud of how strong I was being. There's something else you need to see. Trevor hesitated, his hand hovering over another folder. This might be the hardest part. He opened it to reveal printouts of text messages between Kinsley and Dominic. My lawyer had somehow obtained them through his investigation, though I didn't ask how. The first few were innocent enough, discussions about scheduling and logistics. But as I read further, the true nature of their plan became clear. Kinsley, the lawyer says we need more witnesses to the confusion episodes. Can you talk to the Patterson woman again? Dominic, she's still nervous about lying under oath, wants more money. Kinsley, fine, whatever it takes. Once we get the house, we'll have plenty. Dominic, what if Mom fights this? She's not as helpless as she seems. Kinsley, she won't have any choice. By the time she realizes what's happening, it'll be too late. The papers will be signed. Dominic, and if she tries to contest it? Kinsley, she'll be in Sunset Manor. Who's going to believe a confused old woman in a nursing home? I had to stop reading. The casual cruelty in their words, the way they discussed my fate like I was already dead, made me feel physically sick, but it was Dominic's responses that destroyed me. Not once did he express doubt about what they were doing. Not once did he defend me or suggest they reconsider. There's more, Trevor said quietly. They were planning to expedite the process. What do you mean? Sunset Manor has a special unit for patients with severe dementia. Patients who are heavily medicated, who can't advocate for themselves. Kinsley had already spoken to a doctor there about having you evaluated for immediate placement in that unit. The room was spinning again. They were going to drug me into compliance? It appears so. The doctor she spoke with has a reputation for aggressive treatment of elderly patients with dementia. Once you were under his care, with Kinsley as your legal guardian, she could have authorized any treatment she wanted. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden Robert and I had planted together. The rose bushes we'd chosen for our 10th anniversary were still blooming, defiant against the coming winter. Everything outside looked normal, peaceful, while inside my world was crumbling. How long would I have lasted in a place like that? Trevor was quiet for a long moment. I don't think they were planning for you to last very long at all. The implication hung in the air between us. They weren't just stealing my money and my home. They were planning to make me disappear entirely. There's one more thing. Trevor's voice was barely above a whisper. I did some research on Sunset Manor's special dementia unit. In the past 2 years, they've had an unusually high number of deaths among recently admitted patients. Patients whose families had similar stories about sudden mental decline. My legs felt weak. I gripped the windowsill, staring out at my garden without really seeing it. You think this isn't the first time? I think Kinsley has done this before, or at least tried to. I'm still investigating, but there are some concerning patterns. I turned back to face him. What kind of patterns? 3 elderly people in this county have died in the past year under similar circumstances. All of them were placed in nursing homes by younger relatives who claimed they were no longer competent. All of them died within months of being institutionalized, and all of them left substantial inheritances to the relatives who had them committed. The horror of what he was suggesting washed over me. My God, I can't prove anything yet, but I think your daughter-in-law might be very good at this particular kind of theft. And I think your son has been helping her. I sank back into my chair, overwhelmed by the scope of their betrayal. This wasn't just about greed or convenience. This was about systematically destroying me, erasing me from my own life, and possibly worse. What do we do now? Trevor closed the folders and looked at me with determination I hadn't seen from him before. Now we turn the tables. They think they're dealing with a confused old woman who won't be able to fight back. They're about to learn how wrong they are. What did you have in mind? We're going to give them exactly what they think they want. We're going to let them believe their plan is working. His eyes were cold, calculating. And then we're going to destroy them with their own evidence. For the first time in days, I felt something other than fear and betrayal. I felt the stirring of hope, and something even more powerful, the desire for justice. Tell me what we need to do. First, we're going to let them think they've won. You're going to call Kinsley and reschedule that appointment for tomorrow. You're going to act confused, maybe a little frightened about managing things on your own. Make her believe you're ready to sign those papers. And then we spring our trap. But Marcy, You need to understand something. Once we do this, there's no going back. Your relationship with Dominic, whatever was left of it, will be over forever. I looked around my kitchen one more time, at the life I'd built with Robert, at the memories these walls held. Then I thought about spending my remaining years drugged and forgotten in some terrible facility, while my son and his wife enjoyed the fruits of my life's work. My relationship with Dominic ended the moment he signed that affidavit, I said. Now let's make them pay for what they've done. While Trevor worked on the legal aspects of our plan, I decided to do some investigating of my own. The woman who had been plotting to destroy my life had been in my house countless times, had access to my personal information, and apparently had experience with this kind of scheme. There had to be evidence somewhere, and I was going to find it. The next morning I called Kinsley and put on the performance of my life. "Hello, dear," I said, making my voice sound tired and confused. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about updating my papers. Maybe you're right. Maybe I do need help managing things." The change in her tone was immediate and unmistakable. Where yesterday she'd been frustrated by my reluctance, now she was syrupy sweet and eager. "Oh, Marcy, I'm so glad you're feeling better about this. I know it seems overwhelming, but it's really for the best. I just feel so scattered lately," I continued, hating every word but knowing it was necessary. "Sometimes I can't remember if I've paid bills or taken my medication. Maybe I should have someone looking out for me." "That's exactly why we need to get these legal protections in place," she said. "I've rescheduled our appointment for this afternoon. Is 2 o'clock all right?" "That would be fine. But Kinsley, could you come a little early? I've been trying to organize some papers and I'm getting confused about what's important." "Of course. I'll be there at noon. We can go through everything together." After I hung up, I called Trevor to confirm our plan was in motion. Then I spent the morning setting up the small recording device he'd given me, testing it until I was confident it would capture everything clearly. Kinsley arrived precisely at noon, carrying a leather briefcase and wearing an expression of barely contained excitement. She hugged me at the door, and I had to resist the urge to pull away from her touch. "How are you feeling today?" she asked, studying my face like she was looking for signs of weakness. "A little overwhelmed," I admitted. "I've been trying to sort through Robert's papers, but it's all so confusing. Insurance forms, bank statements, investment accounts. I don't know how he kept track of it all." Her eyes lit up. "That's exactly why we need to simplify things. Once I have power of attorney, you won't have to worry about any of this anymore." She set her briefcase on the kitchen table and opened it with the efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. Inside were the documents Trevor had shown me, along with several others I hadn't seen. "Now, I know this seems like a lot of paperwork," she said, spreading them out. "But each one is important for protecting your interests." As she explained each document, I noticed how she glossed over the actual legal language, focusing instead on vague reassurances about security and peace of mind. She was good at this, I had to admit. If I hadn't known what these papers really meant, I might have believed her caring act. "This one gives me the authority to handle your banking," she said, pointing to a power of attorney form. "So if you're ever feeling too tired or confused to deal with bills, I can take care of everything." "That's very thoughtful of you. And this one," she continued, indicating another document, "transfers ownership of the house to me temporarily, just for legal protection purposes. Sometimes older people become targets for scammers, and this way, your home would be safe." "Temporarily?" "Well, yes, I mean, you'd still live here as long as you're able, but if you ever need more specialized care, we'd have the flexibility to make the best decisions for your future." The casual way she lied was breathtaking. I nodded along, asking innocent questions while the recording device captured every word of her deception. "What about Dominic?" I asked. "Shouldn't he be involved in these decisions?" "Oh, he absolutely agrees with everything we're doing," she said quickly. "In fact, he's the one who suggested we move forward as soon as possible. He's been very worried about you living alone." "Has he?" "He didn't want to upset you by saying anything directly, but he's noticed some changes. Little things, like repeating stories or seeming confused about dates. He loves you so much, Marcy. We both do. That's why we want to make sure you're protected." I had to bite my tongue to keep from confronting her lies right then. Instead, I played my role. I suppose I have been a bit forgetful lately. Yesterday, I couldn't remember if I'd locked the front door. See? That's exactly the kind of thing we're concerned about. She pulled out another form. This is just a medical power of attorney. So if you ever need medical care and can't communicate your wishes clearly, I can make sure you get the best treatment. What kind of treatment? Oh, just standard care. If you were ever hospitalized or needed medication adjustments. Sometimes as we age, our judgment about medical decisions can become impaired. She was setting up the justification for having me drugged and declared incompetent. I nodded as if I found this reasonable, all while my anger burned hotter. There's just one more form, she said, pulling out the last document. This is for emergency situations in case you ever need immediate placement in a care facility. Care facility? Just as a precaution. If you ever had a fall or a medical emergency and couldn't live independently for a while, this would allow me to get you into a good place quickly, without waiting for court approvals. Have you looked into places like that? I've done some research, yes. There are some lovely facilities that specialize in caring for people with memory issues. Very peaceful, very safe. The way she described Sunset Manor as lovely and peaceful made my skin crawl, especially knowing what Trevor had told me about their special dementia unit. Well, I said, picking up a pen and making my hand shake slightly. I suppose if you and Dominic think this is best? We absolutely do. She leaned forward eagerly. And Marcy, once these are signed, you won't have to worry about anything anymore. I'll handle all the stressful details so you can just focus on enjoying your life. As I pretended to read through the documents, making occasional confused sounds, she checked her watch several times. She was anxious to get to the notary, to make this official before I could change my mind, or anyone could interfere. I think I understand most of this, I said finally, but there's one thing that's bothering me. Her smile tightened almost imperceptibly. What's that? Well, if something happened to you, what would happen to me? I mean, if you had these powers and then you couldn't use them for some reason? Nothing's going to happen to me, Marcy. But theoretically, who would take care of things then? She was quiet for a moment, and I could see her calculating how much to tell me. There are provisions for that. Dominic would step in, of course. And if something happened to both of you? That's very unlikely. But if it did, her mask slipped just a little, then the state would probably appoint a guardian. But really, Marcy, you're worrying about things that aren't going to happen. The state. If their plan had worked, if I'd been declared incompetent and they'd both died somehow, I would have been completely at the mercy of strangers. No family, no advocates, no one who cared whether I lived or died. You're right, I said. I'm probably overthinking this. Shall we head to the notary then? It's almost 1:30. I stood up and reached for my purse, then paused as if remembering something. Oh, I almost forgot. My neighbor Mrs. Chen asked me to water her plants while she's visiting her daughter. Could we possibly stop by there on our way? It would just take a minute. Kinsley's jaw clenched with barely concealed frustration. I suppose we could, but we really shouldn't be late. It'll just take a second, I promise. What Kinsley didn't know was that Mrs. Chen was in on our plan. Trevor had contacted her and explained the situation, and she'd agreed to help. When we knocked on her door, she was waiting with a pot of coffee and a story about feeling dizzy and needing someone to sit with her for a few minutes. Oh, Marcy, thank goodness you're here, she said, playing her part perfectly. I've been feeling so lightheaded. Could you stay just until my daughter arrives? She should be here any moment. I looked at Kinsley apologetically. I can't leave her alone like this. Could we reschedule the notary appointment? The look of fury that crossed Kinsley's face was quickly replaced by false concern, but not before I'd seen her true feelings. Of course, she said through gritted teeth. I'll call and see if we can move it to tomorrow. Tomorrow might be difficult, I said. Dominic mentioned wanting to stop by tomorrow evening, and I'd hate for him to worry if he saw all these legal papers spread out. Maybe we should wait until next week. Next week? She couldn't hide her alarm. Marcy, these things really shouldn't wait. What if something happened in the meantime? What could happen in a few days? Well, anything. An accident, a medical emergency. These protections need to be in place as soon as possible. Her desperation was showing, and I realized that their timeline was more urgent than I'd understood. They needed this done immediately, which meant they might be planning something else, something that would make waiting dangerous for them. All right, I said finally. Let me see what I can do. Maybe I can ask Dominic to come by later in the week instead. Relief flooded her face. That would be perfect. I'll reschedule for tomorrow afternoon. As we walked back to my house, I felt a cold certainty settling over me. They weren't just planning to steal my money and lock me away. They were planning to do it very soon, and I had the distinct feeling that once those papers were signed, my time would be running out faster than I'd imagined. That evening, I called Trevor and told him about Kinsley's urgency, about her barely controlled desperation to get those documents signed. She's scared of something, I told him. Or they're working on a deadline we don't know about. I think you're right, he said, which means we need to be ready to act tomorrow. Are you prepared for this, Marcy? I thought about Robert, about the life we'd built together, about the son I'd raised and lost. I'm ready. Good, because tomorrow, we end this. The notary's office was exactly what I'd expected. Sterile, efficient, and perfect for conducting the kind of business that changes lives forever. Trevor had arranged for us to use a different notary than the one Kinsley had originally contacted, someone who was aware of our situation and prepared to help us execute our plan. I sat in the waiting room with Kinsley, my hands folded in my lap to hide their trembling. Not from fear this time, but from anticipation. After days of playing the confused, helpless victim, I was finally going to show her exactly who she was dealing with. Are you feeling all right? Kinsley asked, studying my face with what might have passed for concern if I didn't know better. Just nervous, I said. This is all so overwhelming. I keep thinking about Robert and what he would want me to do. Robert would want you to be safe and taken care of, she said firmly. He'd want to know that people who love you are looking out for your best interests. The ease with which she invoked my dead husband's name to justify her theft was breathtaking. I nodded meekly, continuing to play my part. Mrs. Holloway? The notary, Mr. Stevens, appeared in the doorway. We're ready for you now. We followed him into a small conference room where Trevor was already waiting, along with two other people I didn't recognize. Kinsley's step faltered when she saw them. I thought this was just a simple notarization, she said, her voice tight. It is, Mr. Stevens said calmly. But given the nature and scope of these documents, I'm required to have witnesses present to ensure everything is properly executed. One of the witnesses was Detective Morrison from the County Sheriff's Department, though Kinsley didn't know that yet. The other was a social worker who specialized in elder abuse cases. Trevor had arranged for them to be here as part of our plan. Please have a seat, Mr. Stevens said, indicating chairs around a small conference table. Kinsley placed her briefcase on the table and began removing the familiar documents. As she spread them out, I watched her face. She was nervous now, thrown off by the unexpected witnesses, but still confident in her ultimate victory. Now then, Mr. Stevens said, adjusting his glasses. Before we proceed, I need to ask Mrs. Holloway a few questions to establish her competency and understanding of these documents. Of course, Kinsley said quickly, though I should mention that Marcy has been having some memory issues lately. Nothing serious, but she might need some help understanding the more complex legal language. I see, and you are? I'm her daughter-in-law, Kinsley. I've been helping her manage her affairs since her husband passed away. Mr. Stevens made a note. Mrs. Holloway, are you here of your own free will today? I looked at Kinsley, then back at him. Yes, I believe so. Kinsley says these papers are important for my protection. Do you understand what each of these documents will do once signed? Well, I hesitated, glancing again at Kinsley. She's explained them to me, but some of it is confusing. Something about banking and the house and medical decisions if I get sick. Kinsley leaned forward. The documents are fairly standard estate planning tools. Power of attorney, medical directives, that sort of thing. I've gone over everything with her several times. I see. Mr. Stevens picked up the first document. Mrs. Holloway, this paper would give Mrs. Kinsley complete control over your bank accounts, your home, and all your financial assets. Do you understand that? Complete control? I asked, sounding surprised. Kinsley, I thought you said this was just for emergencies. It is, she said quickly, shooting a sharp look at Mr. Stevens. But it has to be written broadly to cover all potential situations. And this document, Mr. Stevens continued, holding up another paper, would transfer ownership of your house directly to Mrs. Kinsley. You would no longer own your home. Do you understand that? The color drained from Kinsley's face. That's not. You're mischaracterizing the legal language. I'm reading directly from the document, Mr. Stevens said calmly. Mrs. Holloway, are you prepared to give up ownership of your home? I don't think I understand, I said, looking genuinely confused now. Kinsley, you said I would still live there. You would, as long as it's safe for you. But legally, yes, the house would be in my name for protection purposes. Protection from what? Kinsley was sweating now, realizing that her carefully constructed story was falling apart under scrutiny. From scammers, from people who might try to take advantage of you. Like who? Well, anyone really. As people age, they sometimes become targets for fraud. Detective Morrison spoke for the first time. What kind of fraud are you concerned about, Mrs. Kinsley? She turned to look at him, clearly wondering who he was and why he was asking questions. Just general financial fraud, identity theft, things like that. Have there been any specific incidents that prompted this concern? No, but it's better to be proactive. I see. And you believe that transferring Mrs. Holloway's assets to yourself would protect her from fraud? It would protect her from making decisions that might not be in her best interest. What kind of decisions? Kinsley was trapped now, and she knew it. Every answer was digging her deeper into a hole, but she couldn't stop without abandoning her plan entirely. Well, if her memory continues to decline, she might forget things, bills, appointments, medication. She might make financial decisions that don't make sense. Has her memory declined significantly? Yes, quite a bit. She repeats stories, forgets conversations. Just yesterday, she couldn't remember whether she'd locked her door. Detective Morrison made a note. That's interesting, because I spoke with Mrs. Holloway's doctor this morning. According to her recent medical records, she's in excellent mental health for her age. No signs of dementia or cognitive decline. Kinsley's mouth opened and closed without sound. She looked like a fish gasping for air. In fact, the detective continued, her doctor was quite surprised when I told him about the concerns you'd expressed. He said Mrs. Holloway has been managing her own affairs perfectly well and has shown no signs of confusion or memory loss during her appointments. There must be some mistake, Kinsley said weakly. No mistake. We also spoke with several of Mrs. Holloway's neighbors. They all described her as sharp, independent, and fully capable of caring for herself. I watched Kinsley's face as the full scope of her situation became clear. She was caught in a web of lies with no way out. However, Detective Morrison continued, we did find some interesting information about you, Mrs. Kinsley. He opened a folder and pulled out several documents. It seems you've been researching Mrs. Holloway's financial situation quite extensively. Bank records, insurance policies, property values. You've also been in contact with several assisted living facilities, making inquiries about bed availability and costs. I was just trying to be prepared. Prepared for what? For when she might need care. But according to her doctor, she doesn't need care. She's perfectly healthy and competent. Trevor spoke up for the first time. We also found these, Mrs. Kinsley. He placed copies of her fake journal entries on the table. Detailed records of incidents that supposedly demonstrate Mrs. Holloway's mental decline. Incidents that never actually happened. Kinsley stared at the papers, her face white as chalk. We have statements from the neighbors you approached, asking them to lie about Mrs. Holloway's mental state in exchange for payment, Trevor continued. We have records of your communications with the assisted living facility, including your inquiries about their secured dementia unit and their policies regarding heavily medicated patients. This is ridiculous, Kinsley said, but her voice cracked. You're twisting everything. Are we? I asked, speaking in my normal voice for the first time since we'd entered the room, because it sounds like they've described your plan pretty accurately. She turned to look at me, and I saw the moment she realized I wasn't the confused old woman she thought she was manipulating. You, she whispered. I've been recording our conversations, Kinsley. Every lie you told me, every false reassurance, every detail of your plan to steal my home and lock me away to die. I pulled out the small recording device and set it on the table. It's all here. Her composure finally shattered completely. You don't understand. You can't live alone forever. You need someone to take care of you. Someone like you? Someone who was planning to drug me and warehouse me in a nursing home while you sold my house and spent my money? It's not like that. Then what is it like? Explain to me how stealing my life savings and having me declared incompetent was for my own good. She couldn't answer. She sat there opening and closing her mouth like she was trying to find words that would make this all make sense, but there were no such words. Where's Dominic? Detective Morrison asked. We'd like to speak with him as well. He doesn't know anything about this, Kinsley said quickly. This was all my idea. I laughed, a sound completely devoid of humor. Really? Because I have text messages between you two discussing how to handle the confused old woman and planning how to split up my assets. You can't have those. Trevor obtained them through legal channels as part of his investigation. Your husband signed legal documents declaring me mentally incompetent, Kinsley. He's as guilty as you are. The social worker, who had been silent throughout the confrontation, finally spoke. Mrs. Kinsley, what you've described amounts to elder abuse, fraud, and conspiracy. These are serious criminal charges. I was trying to help her by lying about her mental state, by planning to have her forcibly medicated, by stealing her home. Kinsley looked around the room desperately, searching for someone who might believe her, someone who might help her. She found only cold, judgmental faces. What happens now? She asked in a small voice. Detective Morrison stood up. Now you're going to come with me. We have quite a few questions for you, and we'll be picking up your husband shortly. As they led Kinsley away in handcuffs, she turned back to look at me one last time. You'll regret this, she said. When you're alone and sick and have no one to take care of you, you'll wish you'd let us help. I met her gaze steadily. I'd rather die alone than live one more day under your care. The door closed behind them, and I was left sitting in the conference room with Trevor and Mr. Stevens. For a moment, none of us spoke. How do you feel? Trevor asked finally. I thought about it for a moment. Free, I said. For the first time in months, I feel free. 6 months later, I stood in my kitchen making coffee and watching the sunrise paint my garden in shades of gold and pink. The roses Robert and I had planted were blooming again, more beautiful than ever. It was funny how much brighter everything looked when you weren't living under the shadow of someone else's lies. The legal proceedings had moved faster than I'd expected. Kinsley was sentenced to 5 years in prison for elder abuse and fraud, while Dominic received 3 years probation and community service. The judge had been particularly harsh with Kinsley after Trevor presented evidence of 2 other elderly victims she'd targeted in similar schemes. My case wasn't an isolated incident of greed. It was part of a pattern of predatory behavior. I hadn't spoken to Dominic since the day he was arrested. He'd tried calling several times from jail, leaving voicemails that started with anger and evolved into increasingly desperate pleas for forgiveness. I deleted each one without listening to the end. Some betrayals were too deep to forgive, and a mother watching her son sign papers declaring her mentally incompetent fell into that category. Trevor had helped me establish a new will and estate plan, one that would ensure my assets went to charities I believed in, rather than to family members who'd proven they couldn't be trusted. The local women's shelter would receive the bulk of my savings. along with a foundation that helped elderly people navigate legal challenges. My house would eventually become a transitional home for women escaping domestic violence situations. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd escaped my own form of domestic abuse and now wanted to help others do the same. My phone rang, interrupting my morning contemplation. I glanced at the caller ID and smiled. "Good morning, Mrs. Chen." "Marcy, dear, I hope I'm not calling too early. I wanted to remind you about our book club meeting tonight. Sarah's making those wonderful scones you like." Over the past 6 months, I'd grown closer to my neighbors than I'd ever been before. Mrs. Chen, who'd helped me escape Kinsley's trap that crucial afternoon, had become a true friend. We'd started a small book club with 3 other women from the neighborhood, and our weekly meetings had become the highlight of my week. "I'll be there," I told her. "I finished the novel yesterday, and I have some thoughts about the ending." "Excellent. Oh, and Marcy, my granddaughter is visiting this weekend. She's starting nursing school in the fall, and I thought perhaps you could tell her about your experience with your lawyer. She's very interested in learning about elder rights." I'd discovered that my story had become something of a cautionary tale in legal circles. Trevor had written an article about the case for a professional journal, and I'd been invited to speak at several conferences about recognizing and preventing elder abuse. At first, I'd been reluctant to share such personal details with strangers, but I'd come to understand that my experience could help protect other vulnerable people. I'd be happy to talk with her. After we hung up, I walked through my house, seeing it with fresh eyes. Without the constant stress of wondering what Kinsley and Dominic were planning, I'd been able to enjoy my home again. I'd redecorated Robert's study, turning it into a cozy reading room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a comfortable armchair by the window. I'd started painting again, something I hadn't done since college, and my small watercolors now hung throughout the house. The doorbell rang, and I opened it to find a young woman with kind eyes and a nervous smile. "Mrs. Holloway, I'm Jennifer Martinez from the County Social Services Department. I have an appointment?" I'd forgotten about our meeting. Jennifer was a social worker who specialized in elder abuse cases, and she'd asked to interview me for a training program she was developing. "Of course, come in. Would you like some coffee?" We settled in my living room, and Jennifer pulled out a small recording device. "I hope you don't mind, but I'd like to record our conversation for training purposes. Your case has become an important example of how these schemes operate." "I don't mind at all. Can you tell me about the first signs that something was wrong? What made you suspicious?" I thought back to those early days when Kinsley had suddenly become helpful and concerned. "It was actually the kindness that should have warned me," I said. "After years of barely tolerating me, she suddenly wanted to be involved in every aspect of my life. She was too eager to help, too insistent on taking over responsibilities I'd been managing perfectly well." That's a common pattern we see. The abuser establishes themselves as indispensable before revealing their true intentions. Exactly. And they're very good at making their victims feel helpless. Kinsley constantly reminded me how complicated things were, how overwhelming it must be for someone my age to handle everything alone. She was trying to convince me that I needed her. Jennifer made notes as we talked. "What would you tell other elderly people who might be in similar situations?" "Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. And don't be afraid to ask for help from someone you trust, someone who doesn't have anything to gain from your situation. Like your lawyer? Like my lawyer. Trevor had no personal interest in my money or my property. His only concern was protecting my legal rights. That's the kind of person you want in your corner." We talked for over an hour about warning signs, legal protections, and resources available to vulnerable adults. As Jennifer packed up her materials to leave, she hesitated. "Can I ask you something personal? Do you ever regret not trying to reconcile with your son?" It was a question I'd been asked before, usually by well-meaning people who believed that family bonds should transcend any betrayal. I'd given it a lot of thought over the past 6 months. "No," I said simply. "Dominic made his choice when he decided to participate in Kinsley's scheme. He could have protected me, warned me, or simply refused to be part of it. Instead, he chose to help her steal my life and lock me away to die. That's not the action of someone who loves me. That's the action of someone who saw me as an obstacle to his financial future. That must be very painful. It was. But I've learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to walk away from people who are toxic, even if they're family. I'm happier now than I've been in years, and I was. After Jennifer left, I spent the afternoon working in my garden, preparing the flower beds for winter. As I worked, I thought about the life I was building for myself. It was smaller than the life I'd shared with Robert, quieter than the chaotic family gatherings I'd once tried so hard to maintain, but it was authentically mine. That evening at book club, as we discussed the novel's themes of redemption and second chances, I realized that I was living my own second chance. At 67, I'd discovered that it was possible to start over, to build new relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation, to find purpose and joy in unexpected places. "What did you think of the ending?" Sarah asked me. Some people found it too neat, too optimistic. I thought about her question as I sipped my tea and looked around the circle of women who'd become my chosen family. "I think sometimes life gives us exactly the ending we're brave enough to demand," I said. The protagonist could have accepted her circumstances, could have stayed trapped in a situation that was slowly killing her spirit. Instead, she chose to fight for something better. I found that inspiring. Mrs. Chen smiled at me knowingly. She understood that I wasn't just talking about the book. Later that night, as I prepared for bed, I found myself thinking about Kinsley and Dominic. I wondered if they ever thought about what their lives might have been like if they'd chosen differently, if they'd been content with what they had, instead of scheming to take what belonged to someone else. I hoped that somewhere in their punishment and consequences, they might learn something about the value of integrity and the cost of betrayal. But mostly, I hoped they would leave me alone to enjoy the peace I'd fought so hard to achieve. Standing at my bedroom window, looking out at the street where I'd lived for over 30 years, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This house, this life, this future, it was all still mine. Kinsley and Dominic had tried to steal it from me, had come closer to succeeding than I liked to think about. But in the end, they'd failed. I was still here, still independent, still making my own choices about how to spend my remaining years. I'd turned what could have been my greatest vulnerability, my age, my widowhood, my trust in family, into my greatest strength. I'd learned that I was more resilient than I'd ever imagined, more capable of standing up for myself than anyone had given me credit for. As I turned off the lights and settled into bed, I smiled at the thought of tomorrow. Mrs. Chen and I were planning to visit the farmer's market, and then I had a painting class in the afternoon. Simple pleasures, freely chosen, in a life that belonged entirely to me. For the first time in months, I fell asleep without checking the locks on my doors or worrying about what tomorrow might bring. I was safe in my own home, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about me, living a life built on truth instead of lies. It had taken 67 years and a near-catastrophic betrayal, but I'd finally learned the most important lesson of all. Sometimes the best family is the one you choose for yourself, and the sweetest victory is simply surviving with your dignity intact. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.